Why Russia can't produce anything. Russia is technologically dependent from the West. It can't change this under current socio-political structure. Growth of complex industries might entail renegotiation of power balance, which is unacceptable. Let's discuss Russian economy. Many underestimate its dependency upon technological import. Russia is so deeply integrated into Western technological chains that severing these ties will lead to its collapse. Sanctions are already effective and can be made even more efficient. Some argue Russia doesn't produce anything. Not quite. Although industrial goods play little role in its export, it produces a lot for internal market. This is one mining machine produced by a monopolist on mining machines for potassium and coal mines. Owner of this factory isn't a mafia boss. He's an engineer who worked for 20 years designing mining machines, has 41 patents, etc. But what equipment do they use to produce these machines? An industrial machine Morisaki VL553-2 made by a German branch of a Japanese company. This shows how deeply Russia is integrated into the Western technological chains. What Russia produces is produced on Western industrial machines, with Western technologies, Western software and with Western details. That of course includes military industry which uses it all, too. Consider Diana Koledina, CEO of Baltic Industrial Company which makes industrial machines for military plants. She says Russia doesn't produce bearings, ball screws, drives, CNC systems, spindles, so she has to import it all, although as a military supplier she isn't supposed to. Of course government pressures producers to be self-reliant and independent upon import. However, import substitution is 95% PR. Producers and mid-ranked officials pretend to do import substitution because Putin tells so. For this fake work they get real awards. Consider Svetlana Olova, governor of Vladimir. In 2017 she presented a new tractor designed and produced by a local factory under her wise leadership. A CEO wouldn't shut up about how much she inspired them all and guided to this great accomplishment in import substitution. Our governor can guide, can inspire, can command. Several of our main branches of production are organized by her direct orders. One of her last commands is to make our own tractor. It is a huge work of scientists, engineers, technicians for the last 2 years, said CEO Lebedev. President Putin ordered to launch import substitution. Governor Olive obeyed and commanded a local factory to create a Russian tractor. CEO obeyed and engineers designed a new amazing machine for 1135F. That's how Russian vertical of power works. And yet, Russian tractor 4135F isn't Russian. It's a Czech tractor ZR4 Terra 135. I wanna clarify, it is not a copy of a Czech tractor. It literally is a Czech tractor. Russian plant buys tractor kits in Czech Republic, assembles them and pretends they are home-produced. Here you see Governor Oliva in Brno, Czech Republic. What is she doing there? Well, she's buying kits for her home-produced tractors. In 2017 she bought 100 kits from Zeta Tractor Company, in 2018 for 150. That's how she's import substituting. Putin must be proud. Of course, it was all investigated. Of course, dishonest CEO of Russian factory was arrested. Fortunately, they found out that the governor was innocent and didn't know about CEO's shady schemes. So she continued her hard work developing a new home-produced tractor, Vladimirets. Fortunately her patriotism and hard work were well noticed by Putin and he promoted her. Now she's an auditor of the accounts chamber of the Russian Federation. She'll be checking the transparency of other branches of government and make sure they use government funds efficiently. That's how social mobility works in Russia. Bullshiters are actively promoted. Just pretend to work on import substitution, share stolen cash with influential people, and go up. Now you check financial transparency and prevent corruption. Your henchmen go to jail, but who cares? Now you can ask. Russians are good in sciences and very good in math. Russian engineers were doing great in Soviet era and are successful abroad. How come Russia can't produce anything competitive on the world market? Apparently it's not a technical skill that is a limiting factor. Let's return to avocados. They give an answer to this question. Have you ever heard of blood avocados? They are called blood because almost all avocado production in Mexico is controlled by cartels. Thus, when buying Mexican avocados, you are directly funding the organized crime. Many misunderstand what cartels look like. They imagine ragged hobos with machetes. Nope. Cartels look like this. These are fighters of Jalisco cartel who are cheering the name of their gang boss, El Mencho. They look like an army, because they are. Manker Olson conceptualized state as a gang. On its early stages it's a roving bandit, criminal group that kills, burns and pillages, not caring of negative externalias, but when it settles down, it becomes a less destructive stationary bandit, that paves a way for civilization. Many consider Olson's theory as merely an analytical tool. I disagree. It seems that many empires, like Romans or Ottomans in their very beginnings, were quite literally bandit gangs. That's why we have so few records from their beginnings. They didn't care about records back then. Well, in this context it seems that a cartel like Jalisco is a protostate. In fact, it has many state attributes and might not be so different from medieval states which we retrospectively glorify. That's understandable. But why avocados? Why not chairs? Not smartphone apps? Mafia is quite simple. It can't administer something complicated without either destroying the production completely or evolving to something that wouldn't be a mafia anymore. If they entered machinery production, for example, they would either go bankrupt or stop being a mafia. Imagine if they entered some complicated business and had to directly engage into a Schumpeterian creative destruction. Soon they would have to recruit nerds, then promote them, and eventually the balance of power within mafia gang would irreversibly change in favor of nerds. I'd argue that process is critically important for an organization's existence, define its evolution. If STH is existentially important, those providing it will have more leverage, and former strongmen become irrelevant. That's how many mafias of old evolved into STH different. Ergo, economic processes aren't neutral power-wise. That's a major factor of evolution of power structures. That would also explain why many in power would sabotage economic development. If it's too complex for them to administer, it will change power balance not in their favor. That's why cartels choose avocado. It's resource extraction providing tradable goods for export. Perfect forage base for a mafia. They get them through violence and threats. So they must project violent, unpredictable image. Thus US have to sanction cartels and ban avocado imports. That's why cartels do so much seemingly needless violence. It's not irrational as some idiots who never ran a proper cartel would presume. It's perfectly rational. Violent image is a means of production for these guys. If they don't look scary, who's gonna give them avocados? Z guys are not that different from Jalisco cartel. Putin's moves make more sense if you consider that Russia is run by a mafia, by a criminal group which extracts tradable export goods through violence or threats. Violent image is Kremlin's means of production and must be kept. Let's make a simple visualization of dominance hierarchy within Russian economy. Oil and gas are the simplest lucrative industries. Thus they are dominated by Putin's friends, the most mafia-like interest group. Metallurgy is more complicated, so it's run by old 1990s oligarchs. Wild oil and gas tycoons were expropriated, while metallurgy oligarchs were spared and largely remained rich through the entire Putin's era. Because metallurgy is too complicated for Putin's friends to control it directly, they spared it, because they are too mafia to run it. The closer you are to the seat of power, the more mafia-like and thus simpler you are. You are just unable to administer anything complex. That's why the highest ranked and the simplest interest group took oil and gas, something they could rip off without destroying immediately. 1990s oligarchs are more complex but lower in dominance hierarchy. They took something that they could administer without ruining it immediately, the metallurgy. Of course they are ruining it slowly. They are depleting old deposits without developing new ones, but it will take time, and only really complex stuff like competitive machinery is left for nerds like an engineer Skurov, the owner of that mining machine producing factory I talked about. That's very important. Complex machinery is administered by guys who are very low in Russian dominance hierarchy. That's quite important for understanding the economic prospects of Russia. Complex industries, especially hardware industries, are run by very weak interest groups. Higher-ups tolerate the nerds because someone should do it, but they'll milk those miserable dry. Consider the Uralkali, a major potassium fertilizer producer. Considering that it's an extractive business, who do you think controls it? One could assume it will be controlled by a very powerful and simple interest group, by a textbook mafia. Indeed, its chairman is Kamazov, a good Putin's pal since 1980s. In a country like Russia, any extractive business producing tradable export goods, like avocado or potassium, will be probably controlled by some sort of a cartel, and Putin's friends are very cartel-like. Unfortunately, the extractive business of Kamazov's cartel is critically dependent upon mining machines produced by a stupid nerd Sakharov. Kamazov doesn't know how to run a machinery plant, so he has to tolerate the existence of this deplorable engineer. After Russia annexed in Crimea in 2014, the ruble dropped immediately. Is it good or bad? Putin explained it's very good. Previously exporters sold their goods for $1 and got 32 rubles for it, and now they'll receive 45 rubles for the same goods. Our budget revenues increased. Russian export structure is very simple. Russia doesn't really export much complex stuff. Meanwhile, extractive businesses are overwhelmingly controlled by Putin's friends, so he naturally cares about exports of natural resources a lot. That's the forage base of his close circle. In this paradigm, falling ruble wasn't a problem. Exporters of natural resources enrich. The problem, however, is that producers of anything complex work on Western machines with Western technologies and Western details. Ruble falling, their cost of production skyrockets. Consider the cost of -20 mining machine produced by Sakharov. In 2014 it increased by 23.1%, in 2015 by 29.9%, and in 2016 by 72.2%. With the ruble falling and the sanctions imposed, machinery cost in Russia was rising very quickly. Cost of maintenance and repairs rose, too. There was another factor behind the rise in production costs. Ruble falling, exporting metals abroad was more lucrative, so metal prices on Russian market skyrocketed. See how prices on various kinds of rolled steel increased for just 4 months of 2016. Cost of fitting doubled. Ruble falling, costs of everything increased. Cost of oil, of metals, of machinery, but oil and even metal production are controlled by powerful interest groups, so they were allowed to enrich freely. The more dominant you are, the more extractive industry you appropriate. But the low in dominance hierarchy machinery producers started rising prices too. That was unacceptable. Very soon Kamazov organized a PR campaign against greedy Sakharov. That's just one article by a state-owned Rossiyskaya Gazeta. It's inaccessible, but you can still Google it. And yet, machinery producers objectively couldn't keep the prices low with costs of everything rising. Technically, Kamazov could use force to oust his supplier from his business. If it was extractive business, he would just do it. But it was too complex for him to administer. So what did Kamazov do? He decided to outsource machinery supply to Czech Republic. Putin's friend declared that repairing existing mining machines Ural-20R in Russia is too costly and made a contract with Czech company T Machinery to repair them in Czech Republic. This version, however, sounds very dubious. Sending Russia-produced machines to Czech Republic just to repair them and save the costs doesn't really sound convincing. Some speculated that the real reason was not repairment but outsourcing production abroad. The entire case with repairment makes more sense if Kamazov wanted Czechs to dismantle these machines, copy them and produce themselves. If Putin's pals sabotage the entire import substitution agenda, trying to transfer existing Russian technology abroad, it all comes together. You can hardly save money by sending Russian produced for repairment to Czech company which didn't produce them and doesn't know how, but you probably can do it. If you just steal Russian technology and transfer it to the EU, with the economy of scale, you might get it cheaper. Besides financial consideration, there is certainly a power-motivated one, too. If you allow your Russian machinery suppliers to enrich, that's problematic. The richer they get, the bigger the risk that the balance of power might be changed in their favor. Unacceptable. Allowing Czech companies to enrich is safe. Cash earned by Czechs most probably won't be invested in redistributing power within Russia. Meanwhile, the money acquired by a wrong interest group in Russia absolutely can. Thus, growth of complex machinery in Russia presents a risk. Let's sum up what we discussed today. Economic activity which organization relies upon is not neutral. It determines direction of its evolution. Thus, economic progress equals development of complex economic activities, presents a clear danger to existing mafia-like interest groups. The more mafia-like you are, the simpler you are, the less able to administer complex economic activities. If you engage in them, power balance within your structure will change and former strongmen might become irrelevant. Mafia can remain mafia only feeding off something simple. Extractive businesses are relatively simple in a sense that they can be administered by mafia for very long and still produce value. Of course they are being destroyed too, but in the long run, so nobody cares. Complex businesses will be destroyed immediately. That's why dominance hierarchy in Russia negatively correlates with economic complexity. The most dominant and simplest interest group, Putin's friends, appropriated oil and gas. That's just like cartel appropriating avocado. Less dominant group, 1990s oligarchs, were allowed to keep their metallurgy production. That's still quite extractive, but too complex for Putin's friends to administer. To be honest, it's too complex for oligarchs too, but they're smart enough to destroy this industry slowly. Meanwhile, really complex industries such as competitive machinery production are mostly run by low and dominance nerds, which means they won't be allowed to grow. If extractive businesses can rip them off, they will. If they can't, they'd better transfer their production to the EU. Outsourcing anything complex to the West is preferable not only because of the economy of scale. A company working for a EU market will probably make cheaper product than a country locked within the Russian one. It's beneficial because it allows not to pay to internal rivals. Domestic production is not neutral. If you can't directly control a complex industry to allow it to enrich, you feed a rival interest group which will become more powerful over time and then might demand the redistribution of power. That's unacceptable. This makes actual import substitution dangerous and outsourcing anything complex abroad safe. Every dollar you spent on Czech machinery is a dollar not acquired by a rival interest group in Russia that might attempt to topple you in the future. This socio-political context makes any serious import substitution or self-reliance absolutely unrealistic in the short run. With the current power balance and the current institutions, Russia simply can't do it, because powerful cartel-like interest group will sabotage it. Could it change in the future? Yes. Nowadays regime is very, very frightened. It feels the existential threat, which means that if it survives current conflict and allowed to regroup, it could potentially evolve to something much more efficient. It's possible. It just takes time. Finally, from the mafia perspective, making seemingly irrational aggressive moves is totally rational. Mafia extracts resources through violence or threats. Impulsive and unpredictable image is a means of production and any decent mafia has to invest in maintaining it. I believe Putin's invasion of Ukraine is fundamentally rational decision. He used this trick several times and previously it always worked. He had every reason to believe it would work now too, as he didn't expect any serious resistance. Neither did most military experts. I don't think that Putin's decision was insane. I think it was a pragmatic move, based on wrong assumptions, which is understandable. Higher-ups often suffer from deficit of accurate information since subordinates just report them whatever higher-ups like to hear. End of thread.